we were just perfecting the traditional sales methodology, I suppose, and now there's a whole new situation to contest.
Yeah, just to keep things spicy, you know, never a dull moment.
Totally.
Right?
It's like hundreds of years of selling, and then we have to redo it. So before we get into the content, let's go over just a few introductory things. So, like I said, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for people in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission, or MSP's mission, I should say, is to create an environment for 20,000 and growing members to answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. It's to help them see around corners they may not know about in their sales management life.
Like how to manage a hybrid sales organization.
Yes, exactly. You don't realize you're doing it wrong until someone tells you all the things you're missing.
For example.
Yes, totally. MSP does this through live sessions like what you're about to experience today, through their robust online forum, and in the near future, in-person events. There's actually one coming up next week. For those of you who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. If you don't, there's a chat window at modernsaleshq.com, and you can chat Gina and she'll get you added. So coming up, like I mentioned, there's an awesome event next week. If you like this content, you will love Modern Sales Pros. That's an interesting plural. Modern Sales Pros 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening April 12th through the 14th. They've pulled together 11 events of amazing content and speakers. Hear from revenue leaders at Drift, Lean Data, Pendo, Dialpad, Figma, Atrium, and so many more.
It's going to be awesome.
Yes, totally. Angelica's actually going to drop the link in the chat to sign up. A couple things that I'm really excited for. There's a category creation and new selling and selling into a new category topic. That's going to be really interesting. And then on Thursday next week, there's actually in-person happy hours in San Francisco and New York City. So back on that in-person hype, which we're really, really excited about. Yeah, so Angelica's going to drop that link in the chat. And then before we get started, really quickly, like I mentioned, Atrium is the sponsor for today's webinar. And Atrium is a data-driven sales management platform that helps managers use data to improve team performance. Sales managers at more than 200 companies like Figma, SalesLoft, Sonar, Clearbit, and more use the data, insights, and alerts in the Atrium platform to improve team performance. It's super easy to set up. It literally takes 90 seconds, and you have a million KPIs at your fingertips. So Angelica's also going to drop that link, but you can also sign up at get.atriumhq.com. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Pete's introductory slide. Pete, we'd love to hear about who you are.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, folks, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium, also the founder of Modern Sales Pros. I've been doing sales leadership and kind of like early stage go-to-market research and thought leadership for like a hot second now. I wrote a book on early stage software sales called Founding Sales, and it was kind of the summation of my experience of being the founder of a recruiting software company called TalentBin that was eventually acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. So at TalentBin, I went from being a business generalist founder to our first sales rep, sales manager, sales leader. When the company was acquired, we had about a 40-person sales organization. Yeah, so I kind of think about, I think a little bit about sales stuff here and there, you know. So I'm really excited to kind of talk about hybrid selling today, or sorry, managing hybrid sales organizations today. Couple things that kind of like that I've been reading recently that I think folks might be interested in. These are some of my favorite sales management books. So The Qualified Sales Leader, Cracking the Sales Management Code, and 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach. I think we actually have a link around. We have a link that we're going to drop here on. If folks want to go ahead and grab that and sign up for a copy of these books, and also a Yeti mug. A Coffees for Closers Yeti mug. So I think we're going to go ahead and drop that in the chat there.
Yes, we
And then
just
I think wonderful. And so then kind of without any further ado, I think we're gonna get jamming here on our content, on our topic here. So hybrid sales organizations. So we actually did a survey of our customers. Atrium is blessed to have approaching 300 customers, and I think we were able to survey nearly 500 sales managers on the topic of like what their sales organization looks like, if they're all in person in the office, if they're distributed, if they're all distributed. It turns out it's actually hybrid, right? So 95% of teams are either fully distributed or hybrid, and really like that's not gonna change. It's not like it was a temporary sort of thing. Most people are expecting that to grow over time. And so one of the big things that's like a big change, because like as you guys can kind of see right now, I'm sitting on the sales floor. I got a handful of account executives over here. I got some SDRs behind me, but I also have like half of my sales organization that are working from home in San Diego and LA, in a variety of different places. And so the challenge there is that what that does is that compresses your ability to have visibility and drive communication amongst your team. And so there's a couple of like negative implications associated with this. People can definitely take their foot off the gas without the esprit de corps and social accountability. Sales is a really tough gig. You have tough conversations with prospects, and coming off one of those tough calls, it's nice to have someone next to you. You like turn to them and say like, man, that person was kind of mean. Right?
Mhm.
Folks who work on the wrong things. And there's a number of reasons why this is, where this comes from, but it turns out that like, the removal of that social cohesion without some sort of replacement associated with it can really leave a hole in driving ongoing effort. From a management standpoint, like you can't rely on what I like to call instrumentation via osmosis. So like using eyes and ears to be like the traditional, hey, is the sales floor loud? Like what's going on here? And then I think the last thing is that most organizations, and this is something that we found in our customer base, it turns out that this notion of data-driven sales management is like a fairly new concept for a lot of organizations. And so as a result, the level of maturity in those teams or in those managers in order to manage by metric ends up being pretty adolescent. And so the reality there is that all of this can negatively impact performance. And so the good news is that there's actually a solution to this, and we're kind of going to go through 4 steps to that solution. One, first we're going to talk about how to use metrics as your eyes and ears. Second, we're going to talk about how to set and track the right goals. Third, we're going to talk about operating rhythms to ensure that these things are happening here. And then fourth, what we're going to talk about is how to use the information that is found through those operating rhythms in order to troubleshoot and address any potential issues
And then
there.
Pete, just gonna chime
Mhm.
in really quick before we get started and dive into the nitty gritty. Don't worry, this is being recorded and we will share the slides post event. The chat window is open and the Q&A is open. You can use either tab, the chat or the Q&A to ask your questions. Pete's super knowledgeable about this topic, so please leverage him. And then I will be chiming in periodically with resources that we're going to be sharing. There's going to be lots of links dropped during this. We'll also follow up with these links post event because we want you to continue your data-driven sales management journey.
Oh yeah, killer. All right, so these are going to be like the chapters of our discussion today. So first, let's talk about using metrics as your eyes and ears. So the reason why using metrics is powerful is because it replaces a lot of what was previously done, kind of like informally, and like informally, kind of through like in an organic fashion, and but moreover, in a much better way as well. And so kind of the benefits of these would be things like you now can see what kind of has like disappeared into the ether with remote work. The better thing is that like it allows you to coach your teams in a way that even if you were in person, you wouldn't be able to do, because like just listening to the buzz of the sales floor, or like listening to whatever call is like sitting next to you, obviously is a very limited way of doing this. Identify kind of pockets of success in your teams, and then spread that to other things. And then there's a number of other kind of benefits as well, like we're using anecdata to manage by opinion and kind of the negative impacts of that with your reps. And of course, reduce finger pointing between various stakeholders, like, hey, these are unqualified leads. No, the AEs aren't following up with them, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's right there in the data. So then, of course, the first question is, all right, cool, I get it. I'm convinced that I should use metrics. I should be managing by metric. So what metrics do I use? And there's a couple of different ways to approach this. One is in order to determine this. So the first question you should be asking is like, hey, what are the teams that I'm going to be instrumenting? Different roles need different metrics. And so like if you're going to be instrumenting an SDR team, it's going to be different than instrumenting an AE team versus instrumenting an account management team or a customer success team or what have you. Okay, cool. Well, like they're going to be different. So what are these folks, what are they spending their time doing? And so that's actually really going to be kind of contingent on their, on the sales motion in question. So is it a very call heavy sales motion? Like, do you have a sales motion calling into like local SMBs, like a Yelp or a Postmates or a Yext or something like that? So it's gonna be very call heavy, not very like scheduled meeting heavy, not very email heavy. Well, then you'd probably be instrumenting things having to do with calls and the surrounding kind of like metrics that define that. By contrast, if you're talking about like an enterprise, high ASP enterprise sales motions with account executives, that's going to be something that's going to be very meeting heavy. It's probably going to be, a lot of Zoom behavior, things like that, et cetera. A lot of multi-threading within organizations, a lot of contacts per account. So what do you want to be thinking about is like, what would the ideal fingerprint of success potentially look like there? Because that's what we're going to do is like we're going to start there, right? Those are the things that they should be kind of spending their time on.
And then just on the what metrics do I use front, I just dropped a link in the chat for metrics in Atrium, and then this can be genericized without Atrium, just generally whatever data, sales management data you use. So definitely click on that article and look into those. And then on this next slide, Pete's going to go to, if there's any links that anyone wants access to right now, we'll share the slides post-event, but I'm also happy to drop it in the chat, so let me know.
Yeah, and so these are some, so one thing as relates to this though is that oftentimes what ends up happening is like people can get like really lost in the sauce on like, oh my God, what are these crazy metrics that I could be tracking? You actually don't want to do that. Like we want to start basic and then get more advanced. And this is like, there's a lot of things kind of arguing in the wrong direction around this, where there's a lot of where you have have a lot of vendors or a hot recent webinar or whatever saying like, hey, this is like some crazy metric you have to be tracking. It's actually not the case. Like you just want to start with your basic kind of meat and potatoes, and then what will happen is you then get more advanced. Right. So the biggest problem that organizations have is they just don't do this at all. They don't consume the information. And so the way to kind of solve that is to just start. Like just start. Don't overthink it. Don't get lost in the sauce. Just start, even if it's like tracking things on a whiteboard, because then what you can do is you're going to get more advanced and you're going to get more iterative over time. So here are some kind of like examples of what that might look like there. Again, we kind of cited the canonical book on this is Cracking the Sales Management Code by Jason Jordan, who's absolutely fantastic. He kind of presented this framework around how you can break up sales metrics into inputs, outputs, and then kind of efficiency and quality. This is actually an important thing to note. You actually can metrically, right, like quantitatively measure quality. right? Just like a batting average is a metrical is a metrical measure, a quantitative measure of quality, of like somebody's quality of their at bats. You actually can measure quality metrically, and so these are a couple of different examples of metrics you might think about on an SDR team. Kind of same with AE team here, and then the same with a CS and AM team. And so what you'll note is that some of these things kind of like overlap, like account executives and CSMs or AMs. What do they do? Well, you know what? The fundamental unit of like selling behavior for them is probably the customer facing meeting. So like probably the most important thing for us to track. If your account managers and CSMs are owning opportunities, that's a really important thing for you to be measured. Obviously, that's an extraordinarily important thing for you to measure with respect to AEs. But moreover, it's insufficient to be measuring pure opportunity ownership by itself, because what you also want to be measuring is new opportunity inflow coming into AE's pipelines, right? And then moreover, these are all kind of like inputs here. Ideally, what we want to be looking at is outputs as well, and how they connect together. Like we can't just look at outputs. Everyone knows that we have to, oh yeah, we measure bookings. Of course you do, right? But it's insufficient to measure those outputs. We actually want to be measuring the inputs as well. And so by doing both of these things and the efficiency of quality in between, and the kind of the conversion rates and what have you, it gives us a full picture of what's going on with a given what's going on with a given seller or a team or what have you. Cool. So then the question is, all right, well, where do we get this? Where can we get this data? The one thing that you kind of want to be careful about is like requiring too much manual data capture, because that's a really good way of like pissing off your account executives and your AMs and what have you. There's a bunch of different ways that you can actually automate at least the capture of this data before we get into like the visualization of it. As a as a sales operations person or revenue operations person, to the extent that you can kind of automatically capture that information and have that being piped into the CRM or a data warehouse or what have you, that can be a very powerful thing, rather than saying like, okay, we're going to require you to log a meeting each time, versus like, hey, you know what, let's just like hook directly into the calendar and use data that way, or like use that information that way. This is how specific like data-driven sales management software like Atrium automates a lot of this. But at the same time, there may be kind of situations where you actually do need to do manual data capture. Just be kind of careful about that, because you're definitely going to get account exec if you add too many validation rules and things like that. You're going to get account executives and what have you kind of like um, rising up with the pitchforks, etc. Wonderful. So that was a little bit around how we're going to use metrics as our eyes and ears. So the next thing that we're going to kind of talk about here is how to set and track goals, because it's insufficient to just say like, oh, okay, like we should probably be paying attention to these metrics. Actually, what you need to do is say, okay, what is the right level for these various metrics, right? And so again, the reason why we want to do this is because from an output standpoint, we want to win, we want to close a lot of deals, we want to book a lot of bookings, etc. But then the question is, how do we know that we're on our way to winning? And so one of the analogies I really like to use here is is a sports analogy. And so what we can do is focus our players on executing the right quantity and quality of like actions and gameplay. We know that the output will be a successful score, an eventual win there. To kind of quote one of my favorite books on the topic by Bill Walsh, the score will take care of itself. So so how do we actually do that? Well, to kind of like extend this metaphor a little bit here around sports and kind of like how that works with sales, you can kind of see like here are outcomes in like baseball, basketball, football, etc. And so like, how do we know that we're on our way to potentially winning a game? Well, we're scoring lots of runs, we're scoring a lot of points, etc. But the thing is that what we want to be able to do is track that we're on the right path here. And so you can kind of see some of these, this is kind of analogous to this slide up here. You can see that our inputs and our the various inputs that then lead to that right? So like if you're talking about baseball, it's going to be hits, bases, extra base hits, et cetera. On an efficiency side, it's going to be batting average, slugging percentage. Then you get into like super fancy stuff like wins against replacement and what have you. And so the reason why not only do we want to get granular, because then what we can do is look at these leading indicators. The second thing that we can do about this is like we can get very human, like focus on the individual. And this is an area where organizations oftentimes mess up, is they think like, hey, look, we're tracking the aggregate number of opportunities in our organization's pipe, or we're tracking like, the forward-looking forecast for the entire organization, or we're tracking the total number of new opportunities that the SDR team is generating across the team. But what we actually have to do is we have to get granular and measure and goal at the individual level, because that's actually the fundamental unit of performance in an organization is at the human level, right? And so when we instrument at the human level, the way that you do in advanced athletic instrumentation and analytics, what we can do is we can see where the hitch is in somebody's playing motion, and then what we can do is we can intervene and fix that. And so a great example of this is the movie Moneyball. One of my favorite scenes is Billy Bean is having a conversation with David Justice, who's like a really famous, kind of a little bit over the hill, actually a lot of bit over the hill, slugging batter. And so they're having this conversation where Billy Bean is like, "Look, man, I need you to take more pitches, right? I need you to take more." And David Justice's response to which was, "What are you talking about? You're not paying me money. It's like you're not paying me all this money in order to take pitches." And then Billy Bean's reaction to that was like, "Well, actually, when you take more pitches, your batting average goes up." And so that was data-driven coaching that then drove a change at the human level in order to improve performance. And so that's what the sort of thing that you can do when you're instrumenting at the human level.
And then just to add on the goal setting front, I just pasted a link in the chat. We hosted a customer exclusive event about goal setting like a boss. One of our awesome senior CSMs led it, but it's the same principles that Pete's talking about, goal setting at the individual level and getting those goals by originating from your team goals and working them all the way down to individual levels. So that link is in the chat.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, so a couple of principles in goal setting. So, hopefully you're convinced that this is something that you definitely want to be doing. Okay, well, like, how do we do that? And so the way to do that is we're gonna be setting those targets on a couple of those metrics. A couple of those metrics that we're choosing on a per role basis. And then what we want to do is we want to make sure that like those goals are reasonable. We can't say like, "Oh, you know what, Hannah, you're supposed to be having like 50 customer facing meetings a week," right? "Oh yeah, where'd that come from?" "I don't know. Sounded good," right? We want them to be reasonable and attainable and data informed. So how do we do that? Well, what you actually want to do is there's like 3 steps to it. And you kind of like blend it together in a delicious goal smoothie, right? I just made that up. So first, what you want to do is look at historical performance, right? So looking at what your account executives have historically done with respect to customer facing meeting volume, maybe on a weekly or monthly basis, or new opportunity inflow on a weekly or monthly basis, or customer facing email volume or call volume or whatever. Essentially just like let's look at a historical performance across our team so we can kind of see what like smells right. And then what we can do is we can set goals on that. Maybe we don't actually set it on the average. Now, maybe set a little bit above the average, like, "Hey, we're gonna stretch. We're gonna stretch here a little bit." But I don't think you necessarily want to set goals on like your highest performers, because those are potentially not going to be super attainable in that regard. So that's one way of doing it. Another thing that you do is you do a bottoms up approach and say, "Hey," and this kind of goes back to the thing we were talking about before around what should people be spending their time doing. So then the next thing would be, okay, well then how much time do they have in a day, a week, etc., and then how does that time get apportioned? right? So a bottoms up model. So like as an example, we could use account executives for this. 40 hours in a week, sure. Let's say that you've got an organization let's use the Atrium organization. Our account executives are primarily SDR fed, largely because the way that Atrium sales motion works is it takes like 90 seconds to turn on an Atrium account. So our account executives are primarily working with prospects who have a free Atrium account turned on. So our account executives are like spending all day, every day, like doing product tours and kind of talking with people, doing discovery calls, and talking to people about data-driven sales management and like closing calls, whatever. So they're very heavy on the meetings. So in that regard, we expect them to have anywhere between 3 to 5 customer facing meetings in a day. Because if you think about those meetings, like maybe it's a half hour, maybe it's 45 minutes, you got 15 minutes of prep, you got 15 minutes of follow-up, etc. It's kind of hard to do more than 5 customer facing meetings if those are the lengths of them and the prep and the follow-up time. And so what that would do is like that bottoms up behavior there, or like bottoms up modeling, has now informed what a reasonable goal is for that team. If your AE team is different, say you're like a full cycle sales organization doing prospecting, doing disco calls, doing demos, and then maybe even like if you're like full cycle, like doing AM and CSM work, maybe there's meeting time that's spent on that. Well, that's actually going to change the expected levels of the expected volume levels there. So again, just think about it from a bottoms up standpoint, and then what you can do is like you mix that with the historical performance information in order to say, oh, okay, wow, like our historical performance has been like dramatically lower than what I would expect us to be at from a bottoms up standpoint. Sure glad I did that exercise, because otherwise I might have set a goal that was too low. And then the last thing that you can do is you can use benchmarks. This is a little bit tougher to do because like getting the data can be a little bit of a challenge there, but if you can do it, it can be really, really helpful. This is one of the things that is really kind of cool. As I noted earlier, we're approaching 300 customers for Atrium. So we actually have like tons and tons and tons of benchmark data around organizations that have similar sales motions to each other. And so the cool thing about that is actually one of one of the things our CSMs do in onboarding, we call it Atrium University, is actually help organizations do some benchmarking based, again, not erroneously, but based on organizations that have similar sales motions to them. Cool. So then importantly, what you're going to do is you're going to take these 3 things right here, and then you're going to blend it together, right? And then importantly, what you're not going to do is you're not going to like conclude like, all right, here's the end all be all. Clearly, these are the goals we're going to have forever and ever and ever. But instead, you want to start with initial set, right? You want to inform those that are informed by those kind of 3 approaches, or if at minimum these 2 approaches right here. And then what you're going to do is you're going to get started. You're going to publish them, and then you're going to see how it lands. And then what ends up happening is if you set good, like attainable and kind of reasonable goals there, well, what'll happen is your SDRs or your AEs, especially if you like spiff them on those goals, they'll outperform them. And so then you'll be like, oh, wow, look at this. Like my team is outperforming these goals. Maybe we have new goals. Right? Like, oh, look, you guys are consistently like 60% above goal. All right, let's dial that up a little bit there, because in general, we should be getting more efficient in our sales motion, right? We should be figuring out ways of making it such that our SDRs can be calling more or sending more emails or creating more ops in a given time period by making that motion more efficient. The same is true with our account executives. And so then what you can do is you can iterate them up, and then maybe you can iterate, I mean, if they're too high, like maybe you got out over your skis for whatever reason, you can iterate them down. But importantly, what you want to do is you want to publish them out and then kind of see what that looks like. And then iterate accordingly. You're kind of getting like a theme here. Like it's super important to just start. Like don't overthink it. Just start, and then like what you'll do is you'll tune things up over time.
And then in addition to that YouTube video I shared for the goal setting like a boss office hours, I also shared an ebook that's like a step-by-step guide for goal setting. So if you're not ready to just get started and need a little hand holding, that's a really good resource.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh, and also you shared the SDR and AE activity model. I love those.
Yes, yes.
We're big fan of spreadsheets here for prepping, right? We're not a big fan of spreadsheets for data-driven sales management because who's got time for that shit?
Yeah, but you
Cool.
have to do the math somewhere.
Yeah. Well, initially, I mean, ideally, like the software could do the math for you, and then moreover, and then moreover, like maybe your CSM can kind of do that. But
True,
yes,
true.
yes. But if you want to like do it artisanally, I guess it's like artisanal. If you, artisanal goal setting, if you want to do artisanal goal setting,
Bespoke
right?
sales management.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to do artisanal goal setting, right, where you like, nick your fingers and like bang your knee, go for it. We just we just dropped that in the chat. Have fun. Um, cool. So these are some examples here of like what some goals, kind of like reasonable goals might be. Some of the things are like fairly bounded. Like, it's kind of hard for organizations to get, just from a performance standpoint, there's only so many hours in a week, so it's kind of tough to have more than like 15 or 20 customer facing meetings if you're an account executive, unless you're having like 15-minute meetings or what have you. And then you can kind of see things get like a little bit broader here, like email volume, because this is essentially what your AEs are spending in between these times right here, kind of putting touches on pipeline, etc. And then you get up to like, pipeline and win rate and bookings or what have you. And that obviously that's going to be like super variable, contingent on the sales motion. Um, things can be a little bit more banded in SDR land, especially on the pure activity side of things, because if you think about it again, like, there's only so many hours in a day, there's so many hours in a week, etc. Obviously, automation can help you crank this up. Um, but what will probably happen is like as you crank up the activity levels, as you crank up the activity levels here, your email responsiveness rates will fall off. The thing that will change on a sales motion basis with SDRing is like probably the blend. Like, are you more call heavy? Are you more email heavy? Are you, if you're targeting enterprise accounts, um, if you're targeting enterprise accounts, probably the amount of multi-threading that you're going to be doing within that organization, like on a contacts per account engaged basis, is going to be much higher. Same with like how long you're babysitting an account, how much you're engaging with it. These are sort of like quality metrics that will end up being very different, kind of contingent on what that SDR, what your SDR motion looks like. If it's like an inbound kind of like 1, 2, 3 touches and done, and you're just engaging with like leads that are coming in, obviously this KPI is going to be a lot lower. If you're like multi-threading into like some giant organization trying to like thread your way into the chief information security officer, etc., these numbers right here will be a lot higher. So those are some kind of like suggested goals there. Again, don't take these as like hard and fast, because really these are the approaches that you should be doing here. Like looking at your own data in order to use that historical information is a really powerful thing to do there. And actually, this is one of the reasons why customers really like Atrium, because it gives them visibility into stuff that otherwise they wouldn't have historical kind of like visibility into. So now they can set like reasonable and attainable goals versus data informed goals, as opposed to just kind of like licking a finger thrown into the air and be like, yeah, because I said so. That's the number. That's the reason why this is the goal. Cool. So we talked about using metrics as your eyes and ears and why that's important and how to kind of select those metrics. We talked a little bit about how to set and track the right goals just now. But then the important thing is that what you want to do is establish how this information is woven into your day-to-day operating rhythm. One of the jokes we like to say is that the old saw about if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, does it make a noise? Similarly, like if you have a bunch of like SDR performance dashboards, but like nobody's ever looking at them, are the SDRs actually doing anything, or are they playing Call of Duty? And so this is why making sure that you're establishing your operating rhythms can be very powerful there, and importantly, weaving that information into that. So a couple of like best practices here. So first, let's talk about distribution. So when we create these various assets, whether we're talking about like dashboards or reports or other sort of things like alert feeds, etc. What you really want to do is you want to make sure that those things are being distributed and making them come to you. Right. This is actually something I was telling my account executives the other day. Their mind was blown around how, like, with Salesforce, I think you can only distribute dashboards to people have like, you can't put it on an email list serve. You can only send it to people who are like users. So like people end up doing like Gmail forwarding behavior and things like that. And then also you're limited in how many email broadcasts can go out, which of course is like kind of nonsense, because as a seller, as a sales leader, we all kind of like live out of our inbox, versus saying, you know what I should really do right now? I should go like look at a dashboard. And so this is why making sure that these things are distributed and kind of coming to you is really important. So a couple of different ways to do that. URLs are definitely your friend in this regard. Usually most most metrics solutions will have a per report URL. And so then as a result of that, you can do kind of some fun things. You can bookmark them. Kind of get them like nice and front and center. You kind of see that this is the case with me here. Like obviously I've got a bunch of URLs just kind of like hanging out here. But then importantly, merchandise here. So I kind of hard to miss, right? But importantly, what you also want to do is you want to distribute these URLs in assets that are used in your operating rhythm. And so examples of that could be like calendar events, agenda, like meeting agenda documents, etc. But like what you want to do is you want to make sure that those things are present in workflow, because then what that's going to do is it's going to make it such that you're consuming that information and then like deriving insights from things and then changing behavior, right? Coaching appropriately. The other thing that you can do here, versus just kind of leveraging the URL, is make sure that these things are kind of like sending out to folks. And so a lot of reporting packages will allow you to do kind of recurring distribution, whether it's via email or via Slack. This is something that our customers really use the hell out of, is making sure these things are being sent to people like into their inbox at a specific point in time. Like, oh, it's Sunday morning. This is when my Ramper dashboards go out to me, so I can look at them with my coffee. Or, oh, it's Monday midday. This is when the Clean Your Room reports go out to all the account executives to make sure that they can engage opportunities that are untouched or what have you, whether that's via email or via Slack.
And then Pete, just on the URL front, I think a caveat with a lot of the tools and platforms is that sharing the URLs doesn't necessarily mean that people without access to the tool can use them. So that's like a big
Yeah.
roadblock as well. I know there's some solutions that like you share a dashboard URL, but only if you have an actual paid seat can you actually like view it and engage with it.
Yeah, and I think that that's why broadcasts end up being very important, because like, look, I like I'm kind of like a sales operations person in like sales leader clothing. Was it like wolf in sheep's clothing there? And so one of the things I always joke about it with like sales ops people is, yeah, you get begged and begged and begged and begged to make this report, to make this dashboard, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go and you look at the dashboard that you spent like 4 hours setting up or like 6 hours setting up, and then of course the last time it was refreshed was like a month ago. And so you could get mad about that and be like, oh man, like, you said you wanted this. Or you could actually like solve the problem and be like, look, here's the reality. As a sales manager, as SDR manager, right? Like, we're day-to-day knife fighting, kind of running between meetings, helping our reps, etc. And so having stuff come to me via Slack and by email is a very important thing, right? When I have a minute to like walk to the kitchen to refill my coffee and I'm spinning through my Gmail on my phone, having that information present right there can be very, very impactful, versus, oh, now I got to like go log in. So I think like one of the things we talk about in our organization a lot is that the sales operations folks are kind of like the product managers of sales organizations. And so you got to have user empathy to your user, which is like essentially the sales manager. Cool. So yes, again, one of the things that, a really, really powerful way of making sure that this information is present and accessible is putting them into calendar events and agendas. So just making sure that these things are, the metrics are being present there. This is kind of like an example of this. It's kind of like a not amazing um, screenshot of that, but you can see that all of these hyperlinks right here in this recurring meeting invite these are all links off to various reports. Most of them are Atrium, but some of them are not. Some of them are Salesforce reports, and I think actually some Amplitude reports as well. Yeah, I kind of showed you guys bookmarks earlier, and then importantly, like weave it into agenda documents. So like your sales team meeting or your stand up or your one-on-one should have agenda documents. And so then what you can do is you can literally link to those. And then when you're preparing for that meeting as a manager, as a leader, as a sales operations person, 30 minutes in advance or what have you, you're able to jam through here and say like, here are these different things that I should be aware of. Wonderful. And so this is just like an example of like what a prototypical operating rhythm might look like on a given sales team. This is like it could be on a Monday, it could be essentially a sales team meeting kind of with the content that we talked about before. You have recurring midday stand-ups or start of the day stand-ups. Maybe you have a team pipeline review on Wednesday, and then all within that you have like one-on-ones with your teams. And so each of these meetings in your operating rhythm should have assets tied to the purposes of those meetings, right? And that's how you make sure that you're weaving data-driven sales management behaviors into that process. Cool. So I think Hannah, actually, you were going to present this, yes?
Yes, totally. I'm actually sharing the manager rep 101 template in the chat, 101 agenda template in the chat, just for general agenda
It's
templatization.
it's so funny. Like you have a resource for everything. I'm kind of like, holy mackerel, we've like done a bunch of content over the last couple of years. It's
Yeah,
kind of
that,
crazy.
and I think for this specific webinar, we've opened it up to a lot of like the resources we're using for customers, which actually makes that like repository so much bigger. So please enjoy. On the quick commercial for Atrium front, a really great way to manage remote teams manage remote teams in a data-driven way, like Pete has been talking about, is through data-driven sales management software. We're going to share a quick little blurb about Atrium, and Atrium makes software that classifies itself in the data-driven sales management category. Atrium helps sales managers use data and metrics to improve their team performance. Managers need to be data-driven. This is table stakes nowadays. It's really hard to do, and managers aren't really trained on this. So Atrium is helping us achieve a world where managers, whether that's AE, SDR, CSM, AM, and so on, have every metric they need at their fingertips. Gone are the days of flagging down and begging your sales ops person for a report. Sales and rev ops is actually supposed to be a strategic discipline, and they shouldn't be your report jockeys anyway. In addition to having all of the metrics you need, data-driven sales management software proactively monitors and alerts based on KPIs that are important to you, like the goals you've set and alerts on the KPIs that are important to you, and sets goals and helps you set goals and detects anomalies and whatnot, both good and bad. The software does all this for you out of box. And I think a really good example of this is pulling through for like an SDR is it looks like Gabby is 30% lower on opportunity creations this month. And yeah, we're only halfway through the month, but she's not pacing to hit quota. So traditionally, you'd have to pull the data, look for anomalies, identify the anomalies, and the associated resolution, and then coach. With data-driven sales management software, you read the alert and coach. It's super simple and takes a lot of the back and forth out of it.
Yeah, and I think importantly,
Yeah.
the whole idea here is that it's just helping sales managers use data to improve the team performance, right? Like
Mhm.
that's the goal. There's a bunch of different things that folks got to do or ought to be doing, and it ends up like being very difficult to do that with like a wall of charts, an overwhelming wall of like Tableau tiles or Looker tiles or what have you, versus like,
Mhm.
hey, here's the thing that matters to you. Let's go ahead and act on it.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, just to reiterate, Atrium like Pete said, in general, data-driven sales management software uses data to improve team performance. The great news about Atrium is you're in really good company with Atrium. We're helping hundreds and hundreds of revenue organizations level up their data-driven sales management. And then enough about data-driven sales management. Let's get back to Pete.
Yeah, totally. So then the next thing that we're going to talk about here is like kind of what Hannah was just noting there in our terse little advertisement. But the thing is that having metrics is great. Having goals on them is great. Weaving it into your operating rhythms is also great. But the reason why we do all that is to change rep behavior, right? David Justice, I need you to take more pitches, right? Rep, I need you to be more on top of your pipeline because your untouched opportunities are so high. I need for us to schedule time for you to be more on top of more on top of your pipe hygiene. So it's all about detecting and then troubleshooting that and then resolving the problem, right? So the reason why we do all this stuff is to change the future. This is why like forecasting is like not just table stakes, but also just kind of like a legacy way of thinking about this, because the forecast is a reflection of things that have already happened, as opposed to how do we make the forecast better? How do we change rep behavior to raise their win rates, to raise their ASPs, to raise their activities, etc. Because that's going to drive a better outcome in the future. We want to change the future. So how do we do that? Well, we got to figure things out that are problematic. We got to fix them. That is literally your job as a sales manager or an SDR manager. And so what that ends up looking like is one, we got to detect an issue, right? So typically the way you're going to do that, and if you've done these other steps right, where we've selected our metrics, we set goals on them, and then we're weaving it into our operating rhythm, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have lots of opportunities to kind of see things that are off. Right, so a rep who's off as compared to their past performance, is somebody degrading as compared to their past performance, or is somebody off as compared to their peers? Right, are they off? Or alternatively, are they not tracking towards their appropriate goals? Or the inverse, is somebody particularly high as compared to their peers? Whoa, this person right here has a way better win rate than everybody else. Why is that? Right. So what we got to do is we got to detect what's going on. Then once we found an issue, well, we want to root cause what's happening there. Like Hannah was kind of talking about this earlier. It's one thing to say, hey, this SDR, we're midway through the month, we're 50% of the way through the month, but this SDR is only at 30% to goal with respect to opportunity creation. Okay, we know that there's a problem, but now we got to diagnose what's going on there. And so the way that you want to do that is you want to look at upstream KPIs that potentially indicate to you where the issue might be. We'll get into that a little bit more here in the future, but it's insufficient to be like, oh no, there's a problem. You actually now have to diagnose what's going on, because then what we want to do is we want to fix that, right? Fix that issue. And then by fixing that issue, we make everyone better. And then the rep performs better. And then in aggregate, the team performs better. So then once we've diagnosed this issue, we want to communicate that issue, discuss it. So, and it's not like, hey, you know what, Hannah, you got this problem right here. It's pretty obvious to me, etc. But it's more along the lines of like, and I think we talk about this in our data-driven coaching masterclass, saying, hey, I'm observing this thing. Do you have a sense of where this might be coming from? And then we can use data to dig into that a little bit more and kind of figure out exactly what's going on. So an example of that, to use the SDR, okay, this person's opportunity creation is pacing off as compared to goal. Let's go ahead and diagnose that a little bit. Is everybody, are the other 8 SDRs also struggling? No, it's just this person right here. Okay, that's interesting. Well, let's look upstream and look at their leading indicators. Has their activity fallen off? Has their activity quality changed, etc.? Their activity levels hasn't fallen off. Instead, their email response rate and their connect rates on their calling has really like taken a dive. That's weird. Did their messaging change? Are they using different sequences than the other reps? Now we can investigate that and say, oh no, they're like, oh, look at that. They're using an old sequence. Well, let's get them on the straight and narrow, and lo and behold, look at that. right? Reply rates, open rates go up, reply rates go up, et cetera, et cetera. And then what I kind of talked about at the end there was this notion of like looping back. So, hey, this is what I think we should be addressing. Do you agree with that? Okay, great. Let's change your behavior. And then importantly, we're not going to declare victory until we actually see the metrics change. Right? We're going to see that in the case of the SDR I was talking about earlier, we're going to see that email response rate changes and comes into line with everybody else, and then lo and behold, opportunity creation starts improving as well. And so these are some kind of like helpful desk references that we use at Atrium. We give them to our customers, give them prospects too, to help people like kind of understand what those upstream metrics might look like. So for instance, if you're you're talking about AEs and somebody's like tracking problematically with respect to bookings, well, where do bookings come from? Well, they come from wins and average selling price and average deal cycle. If somebody's having a wins problem, where might that be coming from? Oh, well, that might be coming from a win rate problem or a number of at-bats problem. Well, if it's coming from a win rate problem, we would then go upstream from there and say, hey, where is this potentially coming from? Is it coming from a pipe hygiene problem because somebody's got an ungodly number of untouched ops? Okay, if that's the case, I think I have an idea about how we might want to address that. We have a pipeline hygiene problem. We need to coach that appropriately. If it's instead a quantity problem, well, they might just not be having enough new opportunities coming into their pipeline. Maybe they fell off the SDR round robin, or they need to do some more prospecting activity. But again, you want to go upstream and look at these upstream KPIs and see if there's potential issues there. And so these are the kind of ways that you would kind of investigate this. One is this an issue with the individual rep or an issue across the entire team? If it's an issue with an individual rep, it's actually almost a good thing, because that shows us that the rest, like, this is a solvable problem. Like, we have success in the organization. And so what we just need to do is like get this person into band. Alternatively, if it's an issue across the entire team, like, oh man, all of the SDRs opportunity creation is falling off, because all of their email response rates or all of their connect rates are falling off. Well, that might indicate something about like the market or our messaging or what have you, or like, did our win rates across the entire AE team fall off? And so then what we want to look at there is like, okay, is like, if it feels like it's an issue with an individual rep, has something changed? Are they in line with their peers? Are they not in line with their peers? If they are in line with their peers on a variety of different metrics, well, you get a little bit like more of a challenging problem there. It's probably like more of a quality issue. And then lastly, is this a skill or a will issue? And so usually what this can be broken into is like, will indicators would be things like activity levels, email volumes, to use account executives as an example, meeting volumes, email volumes, opportunity touches volumes, kind of things like that. Skill issues would be things like pipeline hygiene issues, like untouched opportunity counts, opportunity conversion rates between stages, et cetera, et cetera. Again, these are all things that are up here, that again, you would want to be able to bird dog and see where there is a potential issue. And then lastly, the thing that you want to do is like, you can't do this diagnosis in isolation. It has to be fed back to the individual themselves. And so oftentimes one of the things that we find is, junior SDR managers, junior AE managers, they don't unfortunately get a lot of training on this. Not only do they not get like metrical training on how to manage by metric, they also don't necessarily get like management training, because most enablement resources go to reps. And so this is actually why one of the things that we do for our customers is we work with the illustrious Richard Harris to put on monthly management classes for all of our customers. But in the meantime, this is kind of like a guide for how to have great data-driven sales performance conversations. I'm not going to take you through everything, but the important thing is that you want them to be frequent and immediate. Like, you don't want to wait, like let something fester. You want to open with positivity, remind of the goal that we're trying to do, talk about the issue in question and like the supporting data. Ask about where they think the causes might be coming from. Propose your own ideas. Like, you shouldn't be coming to this conversation without any idea. Talk about a mutual plan on how this is going to be solved. Drive close with positivity, and then document those outcomes, and then of course loop back again. One of my favorite books on this is 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach by my buddy Corey Bray. Absolutely fantastic, written as like a narrative kind of like parable, super fun. Total page turner. We have like I think we have like, you know, a couple hundred of them at our fulfillment warehouse. We send them out to all of our customers. We like to send them out to prospects as well. You know, we're probably one of the biggest buyers of, of Corey and Himlin's books out there. But yes, essentially it's just like this is definitely a muscle as a sales manager that you gotta develop, because all the metrics in the world and all the like data assets in the world are not helpful at all if you're not closing the loop and having those empathetic yet direct conversations around performance. Cool. So I think we made it, Hannah.
Awesome.
These were
We
the four. These are the 4 steps that we wanted to talk about: using metrics as your eyes and ears, setting and tracking goals, establishing your day-to-day rhythm, and then detecting and troubleshooting things. I think in closing, what we'd love to invite folks to turn on their own Atrium account. Takes about 90 seconds to set up. If you've been curious about data-driven sales management and want to get more into it, there's no better way than just getting started. You can go to atriumhq.com, sign up in about 90 seconds. You just have to, for a free account, you'll be able to walk through all the insights and metrics about your SDR, AE, AM, CSM teams. Moreover, if you'd like a copy of each of these books and a Coffees for Closers Yeti, I think Hannah's going to go ahead and drop a link in. She's going to go ahead and drop a link here in the chat. So
Yes,
Hannah,
I did.
did I miss anything there?
You didn't miss anything. Link is dropped in the chat. And then, like Pete said, we are giving customers seats to those Richard Harris classes. So get yourself self-signed up and get through that process so you can join in on those classes too. But we're going to wrap things up finally. This was an awesome content track. Want to thank everyone for attending. We loved having you here. Thanks to Atrium and to MSP for hosting us. But Pete, you did awesome at presenting, and this content is awesome. We'll follow up with the recording and slides and all the resources dropped in the chat. We'll get those to you by end of day. And then don't forget to check out Modern Sales Pro's upcoming events page and register for next week's incredible summit. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to drop the upcoming events link in the chat right now. But thank you guys. Eric, thanks for coming. Appreciate you for dropping in today.
Cool.
Let's see. All right, just drop that upcoming events link and see y'all soon.